our final session for the foundation stage today, and it's going to be a goodie. So it is Launch from Australia Faster, Global Startup Strategies for Australia and New Zealand Founders, presented by our wonderful friends at Fullstack, whose support for Sunrise has been nothing short of epic. All right, I've got a long list of names to intro you to, so I would like to invite Matt Loop, the VP and Head of Asia Pacific at Rippling, Luke Kim, the founder and CEO of Spice AI, and Cal Davidson, Partnerships Director at Cake Equity. This panel will be moderated by the fantastic Tanya Christie, who is the COO and Tax Manager at Fullstack. Let's give them a very big, very warm welcome.
Thank you, Thea. Welcome, everybody. So going global is something that's currently a hot topic. It's something everyone's talking about, and expanding internationally should ideally be part of your day one plan. It should be something that you consider when you think, where could we go? Where could this go one day? And that's what we're here to explore today. And we've got some really great panelists with us who have been there, done that, and they're really keen to share everything that they've experienced and potentially the lessons that they've learned. So I'll start with Matt. Matt, the key considerations when it comes to expanding internationally, you've done it a few times. Can you share with the audience just what were the key considerations that you had to deal with?
Yeah. So I guess maybe for context, you probably tell by the accent, I'm from the States, and I've had the pleasure to help launch 4 US companies in Australia. I'm sure there's a lot of Aussie entrepreneurs thinking about potentially expanding overseas. I'll give the inverse or the reverse of that, but I think a lot of the same logic applies. I'll start with a vague answer and I'll say it depends. I've had 4 wildly unique and different experiences each time I've opened an office. It was Salesforce, which was a product that works out of the box the same in every country. Product market fit straight out of the gates. But an unknown brand and a paradigm, on-demand computing, now known as SaaS or cloud computing, which no one knew. It wasn't really adopted in the US, and they were still 3 to 4 years ahead here. So that was the biggest challenge I faced in that launch. I went to LinkedIn. There was 9 million members in Australia already in the platform. It was kind of fishing with dynamite. The network was already there, very easy to get meetings. And I'd say that's the easiest and cruisiest of my kind of 4 experiences. Slack was great in that PLG. We launched in this market once we saw adoption of our free and paid products without having any investment here. So for those of you who might have that opportunity, that's a great way to get in, which I think might apply to Cake, where you can have customers, you can have a certain amount of revenue in place before you actually decide to invest, put resources there. The place where I'm at now is Rippling, and of course, it's the hardest because the product is very nuanced to market. We sell HR and payroll software, and there's a lot of modern awards, there's a lot of changing employment law here. You have to stay on top of all of that. The product needs to be designed and fit to that. So my answer is it depends. Very much applies to each of your unique situations, but what I think might be common and would transcend for everyone, regardless of your unique situation and what you're considering. Number 1 is people. That has always been the epicenter to how we've launched successfully. And a few nuggets I would say. Number 1 is I can't be a bigger advocate and proponent of transplanting corporate DNA. So if it's an Australian company thinking about going to Singapore, to the US, wherever, but you have to go there. I think trying to hire from here in another location, someone who might be in industry and you think they can start it up on their own, you're laughing, it's not gonna happen. You gotta bring someone there who brings a unique DNA of your business, the product understanding, what's worked and hasn't worked in your home market. And that's gonna help accelerate your success. It's gonna help ensure that the business that's created in the new market aligns to the one that you've built in your headquarters. It's gonna ensure that the product is represented, sold, and managed for your customers in a similar way. So for me, that was huge. The enablement benefits, just making it easy for me, particularly when I've been a new hire, which is the case at Rippling. We brought a few people over, both product and sales experts, that have made it very quick for me to set it up. The second is be researched. Like, you got to do the legwork and prepare. I've had the benefit of doing that once, but I haven't had the benefit of doing it here when I joined with Rippling. The business was launched, our product was built for the Australian market, and I came in here and had to effectively build it from scratch on my own with a couple people. And so I'm learning along the way that there could have been a whole bunch of things done in advance to me joining that would have made my entry easier. The right partners, the right ecosystems, the right thought leaders, and people that you can associate with in the community is probably the biggest thing. For me right now, what I'm feeling and understanding in launching a business, I'm 10 months in, is community is more important than it's ever been in the previous 3 that I've launched. If you want to, go fast, go alone. Go far, go together. I'm very much feeling that. So, the right internal people, but the right external communities. And I've seen, I spent a couple years back in San Francisco and had 2 or 3 Australian entrepreneurs that we shared a ferry ride into the city every day. And one group of them showed up with none of that done, and they really struggled to get traction in the US. The other one had spent, I think, 2 or 3 years doing back and forth trips, had the VC relationships, had all of the right partners in place, and his business just took off as soon as he started there. So I think be prepared, do all that legwork, relationship building, networking, know what you're getting into before you go, and prepare your stomach. It's not a short-term thing. You need to take a long-term view. It's very much a commitment. It's going to be a bumpy road as you adapt to a new market, learn the nuances, wherever it might be. But I'd say those kind of 3 things I think would be common, whether you're me coming here or any of you looking to go overseas.
Yeah, I think as an accountant, it depends is my favorite answer as well, because it really does depend. So assessing whether or not going international is important, is fitted for you is really, really important. Thanks for the great insight. And speaking about networks, I think Cal, you guys you've gone over to the US and you're doing really well over there. So can you help the audience what they need to think about when it comes to networking and building partnerships, and how you get your product market fit ready so that you can launch successfully?
Yeah. So I guess there's, again, just a little bit of context. So Cake Equity, a big part of our go-to-market is the community engagement and our partnership network. So that's here in Australia, but very much internationally as well. But we also actually, a key thing that we actually do with our clients is enable them when they're actually going overseas to be able to actually hire across multiple countries and give equity incentives as part of building their startup teams across multiple geographies. So we've got the kind of 2 lenses on it there, right? In terms of the US, from day one, the whole community engagement and partnerships piece was a really big part of our go-to-market planning there, right? So it was like we had assumptions around, and we'd done some research around, who are the players in the US, how does that compare to the ecosystem out here or whatever. But certainly a lot of our initial time there was actually spent validating that. And the interesting thing about it is there are actually some significant differences in terms of how some of the, particularly the professional services, work in the US versus how they work here, right? So one standard example that really applies to our category is in the US, we were having a conversation before, who does most of the work on your cap table?
Our lawyers.
It's lawyers, right? Whereas in Australia, it's not that clear. It's like, could be your accountant, could be the founder or whatever, right? But the top law firms want to control the cap table for their clients, right? So that's really important for us to actually understand that, to build those relationships, because they're a key to the buying decisions for our clients ultimately, right? So just understanding those sort of things has been really important. The other thing I would say, and it's not necessarily specifically related to partnerships, but also advisors, and that learning thing that you talked a little bit about, Matt, is like tapping into partners and tapping into other people who are super users like the lawyers over there, they can really help accelerate your understanding of what's actually required in terms of localization of your product, right? So we're not like a Salesforce, like, how you actually grant equity in different countries varies depending on, it's like hiring in different countries, right? So there has to be a degree of localization of what we're doing within our product. You know that at a high level before you actually go in, but it's not until you really get in there and you start dealing with people that are using your platform that you really get to learn that. And certainly by engaging with sort of, attorneys who are super users and using it all the time, it can really help accelerate your learning curve and your adaptation of your product and the localization that you need to actually make yourself successful. So that's a couple of the different areas.
And what would you recommend they do to build up those partnerships and build those relationships? Because we know networking in Australia is quite big. Would you say internationally that's the same situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly there's an element there where a number of our partnerships we have in Australia are with multinational firms that have presence in different countries. So you tap into that where you can actually do that. Tap into your existing network here in Australia. We were already actually well established in Australia before we went overseas, so you can actually tap into that. But then there are also other people like, your Austrades, your Trade and Investment Queensland, all of those types of bodies also have networks out there and can introduce you to people as well. So I think it's a multifaceted approach to it, right, in terms of actually how you do it. But then, by doing research and actually understanding who are the key players around your product category or whatever, be targeted and these are the type of people it's going to be valuable for me to get introductions to.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. And I think with hiring international and, like you said, giving equity to staff, it's a really difficult topic. And Luke, you've got an international team, fully remote, and so you got to experience some operational challenges. Would you mind telling the audience what it's like to hire internationally, what the challenges are that you might face, and then also what do you do on a day-to-day basis to manage the team?
Yeah, so also for a little bit of context, Spice AI, VC-backed early stage startup, it's Delaware C Corp in the US, raised there, and then we have an Australian entity here that we set up to hire. We also have some engineers in Asia as well. Before this, I was at Microsoft for almost 13 years, built and managed teams across all Asia, US, EU, and also set up engineering offices in various places. So my perspective is a little bit different in that it's more from an engineering and team setup and management point of view rather than a go-to-market aspect. I would echo the sentiment is that you got to be prepared and go forth. And also find people who've already done it before. So, and this is good advice, I think, for just any part of your business. It's like, find lawyers that have already set up subsidiaries in that place. Find accountants that have already set up relationships and kind of know all the employment law and the accounting and the intercompany transfers and all that type of thing beforehand. And all of these people who've already done those things. You can also, leverage. We were actually looking at doing some stuff in Dubai, and through the Washington State, we're in Seattle. They actually got us in touch with the U.S. Secretary of State in Dubai, and they could be very helpful with introductions and community and those types of things. So you can leverage those things as well. In terms of hiring and kind of managing teams across many countries. I would say, again, it depends, and you don't want to have just one sledgehammer. You want to be very targeted and do what makes sense for every country. But preparation is key, and having really good partners on the ground, I think, is very key. In terms of managing day-to-day, I would say, I've done the full round-the-world thing in Microsoft. Very difficult. So at Spice, what we said, okay, we're going to hire people from Asia to essentially West Coast US, and we'll take essentially 2/3 of the time zone. We have an overlap. And so you really want to be, I would say, just intentional about how you, like, are you going to be intentional about having a fully global team, which generally means you need managers in, like, regional managers in each place, because you really just can't do the whole world, or are you going to have it be more targeted, and that way you can kind of manage more and have a more cohesive, at least kickstart off. The first and the next thing I would say in going out there is you want to stage it. So initially, I think, like as you said, bring that DNA first and kind of bootstrapping it. I created the engineering office in Korea in 2015 for Microsoft, and I started hiring people from Seattle, bringing them over first. And actually, my co-founder in Spice, he's still in Korea because I was at Microsoft. I hired him into Korea office, and he loved it there so much he just stayed. And then after that, we both left Microsoft and founded a startup together. But that first initial set of people is really important, and then growing it from there. The final thing I'll say is just like, and this is good advice for all companies, over-communicate. So everything is just like over-communication, because when it's also for remote companies as well, remote, cross-time zone, cross-country, cross-culture, everything has got to be over-communication. We have a very strong written culture at Spice, so do as much written stuff in addition to as much calls as possible as well.
Yes, keeping in communication, I think, with remote work is really important, and that's a great topic. What I'd like to hear from the audience is, how many founders have we got in here? Can we see by show of hands how many founders have we got here? How many of you are international, if you can keep your hand up? And anybody here that is looking at potentially starting an enterprise or going into starting a business, starting a venture? And employees, have we got anybody looking to work with founders? Awesome. So we're ready to take questions from the audience if you have any. So you can either just raise your hand and the microphones will run around, or you can direct your question to someone specifically, or you can just direct it to the panel overall. This is what's put there.
Coming over.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
Great discussion. I wanted to ask, you all talked about thinking about scaling internationally from day one. Does that scare your VCs when you're raising initial rounds of investment?
So does it scare the VCs when you're saying you want to go international from day one? Am I understanding
That's
it correctly?
right, yeah.
Yes. What is the...
I can talk from
Yes.
A lot of users on Cake. Like if you're in the Australian market, like the TAM here available to you is actually fairly finite. So I think, depending on the size of the VC, a lot of them will require you to be thinking about that to access a size of opportunity that's going to make sense for a Blackbird is going to be wanting you to think about that from day one. I think it would be a plus in Australia. Interestingly, in the US, because you've got such a big market, a lot of our users there, a much lower percentage of the early stage startups are worried about the international stuff because they've got a big market to address in the US first, right? So it depends on the country a little bit, but from an Australian perspective, I'd say it's probably a plus.
Yeah, I can comment on my experience that I've seen just at Fullstack as an advisor. We often see that investors who see that the founding team are big dreamers and big thinkers, they invest in the founding team, so they don't necessarily invest in the idea that much, but it's the founding team. And if you're a dreamer, if you're someone that thinks outside the box, they might even require you to think international and encourage you to think international instead of just being, we will serve a single market. But that's if it fits with your product or fits with your service. I think we had another question here in the front. Yeah.
Thank you. From Cake's perspective, I'm a big fan and loyal customer. Were there certain metrics that you had to hit internally, being an Australian-based company, first before you agreed to launch in America?
We didn't have we had to have product market fit here in Australia, right? So there wasn't a certain, it was the retention metrics, it was, the growth rate and all those sort of things. So, we need to, it was definitely we need to establish our beachhead market here in Australia before we actually start going overseas. So that was definitely it. Our thing was naively, let's go global and let's turn on every country. I went and focused on Singapore. Jason, one of the co-founders, focused on the US. And after about 6 months, we've gone, hang on, we're really tired and frazzled and we're not getting a lot of traction. So let's actually park Singapore and let's just focus on the US, because we're not Salesforce, we're not massive. And then even in the US, let's stage what we're doing there. So we've deliberately, for the first 2 years, pretty much stayed away from Silicon Valley, right? And focused on Southern California and focused on Colorado, right? Let's get match fit, let's learn, let's get that localization done, let's make sure that we've got the partnerships in place before we actually go and start trying to hit the valley, right? So yeah, there weren't clear metrics, but certainly we wanted to actually have that product market fit, have a really good stable base here before we started actually pushing into the US.
And when you got to the US, was it instantaneous? You had a market, it was all there? Or is it a staged approach where you get there, it's a bit of a ramp up, you fail a little bit in the beginning, or is it an instant success story?
Yeah, look, we were pretty measured in terms of how we actually did it. So we flew in, flew out, initially. We didn't hire people on the ground there. We actually used equity incentives to get some advisors there or advocates for us who had good networks in the startup ecosystem. So there's no way we could have afforded to get these people as full-time employees, but by giving them some equity, we could actually tap into their network. So we were measured in terms of what we actually did. But we've spent like a good, I think, 18 months really getting the product localized and getting a lot of the building blocks in place that we need to be able to actually really scale successfully. And that journey is transitioning from having a lot of your clients coming through paid acquisition to actually more organic, getting our CAC down and all of those things that you need to actually see. But it's a journey, right? We're 2 years in and we're still
every day.
Yeah. I mean, even though US now generates most of our new users, paid users, which is great, but we're still just like at the beginning of our journey there.
Fantastic. And what about when you do land in the US or when you do land internationally and you've got your team there? You've mentioned very briefly that you don't need full-time, or you can't really afford full-time. Do you find it hard, and it's a question for all three panelists, but do you find it hard when you have part-time staff or fractional staff that do certain things really, really well, but you can't afford them full-time just yet? Maybe Luke?
So we've done less, I would say. I say there's like 2 stages, right? I think the first stage is really, you've got to be good at remote first to some degree, because you're going to start with some seed people, not like a whole team, right? And so a lot of the things that you would do to work well with a remote team, I think, apply there. And when you're with a small team, like, we want to focus on what we do best in the business, like our core business value. And then we want to use the best experts alongside that. And so what I would say is you treat them like you're working with other people, like, Fullstack, you're the experts with the accountant, we're going to treat you as an expert. And so the people on the ground there, even if they're partial, you can treat them, they should be the experts in that market. And so you can really leverage them in a similar way that you might use other experts in your system, whether it be legal or HR or accounting or so forth. And then I think you've got to be intentional about that transition from that mode to, okay, now we have a full team there, yes, and they're have more autonomy and they're growing themselves. So.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the audience? Poor Thea. Getting your steps in.
I was just wondering, where do you find like A-star employees? Like the top of the top, who you're going to take over to a different country, like the best of the best. Where do you breed employees like that?
Where did Salesforce find you, Matt?
I think for the ones who are that, in my experience, I think I was one of those transplants who I worked for Salesforce in headquarters in 2003 to 2004. I think was successful, was wildly ambitious, had aspirations to move overseas, and put myself in that position. And I think that's what I've experienced to be the right DNA. It's what happened when I brought over folks from LinkedIn. It's what's happening right now at Rippling with the few folks we brought over. They wanted that international experience. It's a great thing to have on the resume. It might be for their personal world travel. It might be professionally, something that they can put on their CV moving forward. But they've also proven themselves, not only aptitude-wise within the business, they've succeeded and done their job effectively, but they're also cultural stewards, right? They're going to bring the values and the goodness of what, hopefully your brand and company is all about to this new location.
Yeah. And I would recommend if you are looking at hiring internationally, it's a certain person that can work remote. If you're thinking of doing remote, it's a certain person that can do that successfully. So vetting the candidates really carefully and putting your culture out there so that they know who you are, they know what they're getting into, and they become evangelists of whatever your product or service is what I would recommend just as an advisor. What I see works for our clients. Just finding someone who loves your product or loves your service as much as you do would make it a lot easier to find that diamond in the rough. Anyone else? There's one back there, just one there.
Just curious, as Aussies, we typically just go to the US because it seems like the obvious choice. But is there any sort of markets that you're seeing that's an opportunity, especially for Aussies, to sort of launch into markets?
Yeah, feel free to go for it. I think from an advisor perspective, what we see a lot is Singapore is it's quite investment heavy, so there's a lot of good incentives there as well. And obviously New Zealand it's an easy one to get into. I don't know if you would like to discuss any of the future plans that you have or that you're thinking which markets to go into, but that's just traditionally what we see our clients going to.
I can maybe talk for a minute just about our thought process about why we sort of chose to park Singapore versus like the US. So the interesting thing is in the US there's a lot of competition for what we do. There's an incumbent there who's been doing it for 15 years, right? In Singapore there was virtually no competition, fast growing market and everything, right? But we're a product-led business, right? So the fact that there's actually a mature startup ecosystem out there where we're not having to create the category and sell against spreadsheets, we've just got to be better than the competitor over there. And it's a sophisticated market. The rates of adoption for SaaS are high there. The average revenue per user is going to be higher than it is in some other countries in Asia, for example. So all of those sort of things are some of the things that we actually went into our decision-making process around saying, even though we're going into a market which is a lot more competitive than Singapore or maybe even the UK or whatever, it made sense because of the type of business we're running and the dynamics of our product and how it plays into that market. So I would say it probably depends on what product you've got, and it's probably going to be a different answer to everybody. But yeah, that would just some reflections on our thought process,
So, yep, we had another one there at the back, and then we'll
Hand up. Okay.
then we'll wrap up.
Thanks for that. Thanks, guys. My name's Dave from the Kiwi Artisan. I have a small FMCG demand gen business in New Zealand, and we probably entered Australia and the US far too quickly in our first couple of years, so learned a lot there. What's probably from your new market entry learnings that the most important thing out of talent, sales, product market fit, all those things that you go to first in your first 6 months of entering a new country? What was the most important or took the most of your time getting right from the start?
I think we'll take that one down the line. So if you want to start, Matt.
I think talent is the most important thing. Ideally, you can either bring some folks over from the business, and then second, you can hire from your own personal network or networks that you trust, and you can get people that are going to align to your values. I think I have challenges every day. Like I just wake up and it's whack-a-mole of something new. And if I have great people, which I do, we'll figure it out. We'll get through it. So you got to get talent right. The people that are on the ship that's going to go ride through the storm and have the abilities to do that, right? They've got the stomach and the ability. So I think you got to get that right or the experience is going to be miserable.
Great. Luke, what would be the key consideration for you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree on talent. And from the question before, it's like, how do you find these people? I say, like, A players, they like working with other A players.
Yes.
And so it's really, really important from the very start to get an A player, especially that first missionary out there, right? I also, when I created the Korean office, was that first person out there as well. And then that person's going to get all the other people in. And so they have to be A players, but then they also have to be experts in those areas, right? They have to have done it before, right? So, yeah, it's really important.
And Cal, what would you say? Which one would you say is the most important?
Sorry, what was the question, guys?
So between talent, market fit.
Talent, yeah, definitely. Like
I think it's unanimous.
People are key, and as you said, the culture, like in terms of having the right people and also the right culture, and being able to actually attract talent. If you've got that stuff right and you can actually communicate that right, you will get the right people to actually join, Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll wrap it up, I think, by just one key point that you would like the audience to take away or to think about. Very short, one sentence. Cal?
I think, strap yourself in for a ride, right? It's like there's the overnight success will be a 10-year journey, right?
Yep.
So strap yourself in and get a good team around you. As Matt said, stealing all Matt's great points, but I think they're really well made.
Awesome. Luke?
People and communication, and those two always go together. So, like, especially new markets, especially remote teams, over-communicate, up, down, left, right, all the way around. So,
Matt?
I'd say plan. I'm in a situation now where I know we're going to go to our next market, Southeast Asia, within 6 to 12 months, and I have the luxury of doing all this legwork and hopefully reducing the risk of failure and making the transition and entry smooth. So it's finding the right people, it's figuring out the partners, the competitive landscape, the playbooks, the unique things we might need to do product-wise. Do all that work up front, make it a smooth landing, hopefully, and an accelerated success if you're going to a new market.
Fantastic. If there are any other questions, the panelists will be hanging around outside in the foyer a little bit afterwards, so feel free to walk up. They're very friendly. The Fullstack guys all wear Fullstack shirts, so you can walk up to us as well and come say hi. And with that, I'll thank you for joining our session today, and I'll hand it back to Thea.
And sorry I missed the black corporate t-shirt thing. I feel out of place.
Thank you so much. What an incredible panel. The key takeaway there was really like how important people and community are to launching overseas. That's it for the foundation stage today. A reminder about Moonrise and getting on the Brella app. We've got some more sessions on the vision stage, so we'll see you in there. Thanks everyone, and see you tomorrow morning.